our top priority, which is to reopen government and end this reckless Trump shutdown. Democrats have consistently made clear that we support 21st century border security. We support infrastructure. We support personnel. We support technology. We support additional investment. But at its core, government is about the management of public money. We can either manage that public money efficiently or we can waste taxpayer dollars. House Democrats have an Article 1 responsibility to make sure that we manage public money efficiently and do not waste taxpayer dollars. We want to have a mature discussion about border security. We want to have a mature discussion about our broken immigration system. We want to have a mature discussion about bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform, and that is why we need to reopen the government, and that is what we will continue to work on this week. We have Coast Guard members and their families who are suffering. We have Border Patrol agents and their families who are suffering. We have TSA workers and their families who are suffering. We have people in need of affordable housing assistance and their families suffering. We have farmers and their families suffering. We have small business people throughout America and their families suffering, and that is why we need to end the reckless Trump shutdown. Let me now yield to my distinguished colleague and Vice Chair, Katherine Clark.
Thank you, Hakeem, and thank you all for being here. We're on day 25, the longest government shutdown that we've had in our history. And the human impact of the president's reckless behavior is starkly apparent. I can tell you that the phones are ringing off the hooks in my office and in offices of representatives from around the country. And we are hearing heartbreaking stories. Let me share with you one from a small town, River Falls, Wisconsin, and Mallory Lorge. She lives in a small town and she has 2 vials left of the insulin she needs to treat her diabetes type 1. She is rationing them because she can no longer afford the $300 copay now that she has not received a paycheck. A TSA worker from my district in Watertown, Massachusetts, put it very well as he said, as a federal employee, we're not supposed to be used as political pawns. We are sending an earthquake through communities where our federal agents live, where our federal employees live. A 30-year-old Lyft driver from Maryland reported he is making half of his usual pay because of the reduction in tourism and agencies in the D.C. metro area. We are hearing from restaurant owners who do not have the same influx of customers with this shutdown. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, we heard from a startup in my district that primarily has DOD and DHS contracts. They have a week and a half left of funding to meet their payroll. And it is often the federal contractors' stories that we don't hear discussed. We also have a nonprofit in New England that is struggling to provide assistance for people with disabilities who often are not able to get the work that they need and are afraid they will never return to their job. Routine and structure are so important for so many of these folks, and with the continuing shutdown and inability to go to work, their lives are severely impacted. These are just some of the devastating stories that are causing so many problems in American homes, businesses, and for the bottom line. That is why Democrats are unified in our call that let's reopen government. We can keep the pressure on negotiations over security, but it is long past time that we reopen government and make sure that it is not federal employees, their families and businesses that are being held hostage. To help bring some of this human side of this shutdown to light today, I am very pleased to have with us a member of Congress from Connecticut, the 2016 National Teacher of the Year, Jahana Hayes.
Good morning, everyone, and I'm so happy to stand before you as the Congresswoman from Connecticut's 5th Congressional District. I want to talk to you a little bit about how this shutdown is affecting the people in my community, from domestic abuse survivors to our rural farmers in Connecticut to people who rely on low-income housing. This has catastrophic effects in those communities. In my district, Connecticut 5, we house 5 of the 9 domestic abuse and violent shelters in the state. Those shelters are at risk of closing their doors. There's an uptick in the number of reported incidents of sexual assault and domestic abuse following the Kavanaugh hearings, but there's nowhere for these women to be serviced. We cannot be sending that kind of a message. Connecticut farmers have been reaching out to my office in droves through phone calls, through letters, talking about how the insecurity of this administration leaves their futures at risk. They've talked about how we need comprehensive immigration reform because they rely on workers who come across the border as seasonal workers. They rely on them just like we rely on them like they rely on us. That's what I've been told by people in my district. In my district, 175 low-income housing units have defaulted on their payments from the federal government. This puts people with housing insecurity at risk to be homeless, to have not have the safety and security that they rely on. The SNAP program is vital to over 400,000 residents in the state of Connecticut. They rely on this assistance. Many working mothers, many single parents rely on the supplemental assistance to feed their children. As a teacher, I recognize that kids can't learn when they're hungry. This is not their fault. And I think the one thing that we're not talking enough about, and the last point I'm going to make, is that this shutdown is eroding people's confidence in government. I ran on a platform that government works, that good government works, and it's there to help people until they can help themselves. And then at the point where they could stand, they turn around and give back to their communities. That was the platform I ran on. That's what got me elected. This idea that we help each other, that we are communities of people. That message mobilized young people, it energized young people, it engaged people who never saw themselves as part of government. This is not government working. This is not what it's supposed to look like. This shutdown is not what good government is supposed to look like. No other government in the world shuts itself down. We have come as members of Congress to do our job. We are a separate but co-equal branch of government. This idea that we vote on a resolution and wait to be sure that the president will sign it before it's put forward, that's not what it's supposed to look like. We all have a responsibility here. People sent us to Washington to do our job. They're relying on us to do that job, and we have to put pressure so that this government opens. People in my community are depending on it. The people in all of these members' communities are depending on it, and we are their representatives. We are their voice in government, so we have to do better. We're working hard. We're here. I think we're going to continue to pass resolutions to try to open up departments of government, but we have to do better. This cannot be where we stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Jahana. And now one of our other exciting, dynamic new members of the freshman class, someone who is one of the co-freshman leadership representatives, one of the leaders of the freshman class of 2018, Katie Hill.
I want to talk about security today because that's what you hear a lot from President Trump and his allies. My district is California's 25th district, which is the northernmost part of LA County, and it is home to the LA Air Route Traffic Control Center in Palmdale. All aircraft into Southern California airports are controlled through that center, which covers 177 square miles of airspace, including portions of Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, and Mexico. It's one of only 22 en route centers across the United States with 500 employees, 320 air traffic controllers. covering 5,500 flights a day to 6,500 flights a day, including special use airspace, which is used primarily by the military. That makes up 40% of those 177,000 square miles. This covers huge airports, LAX, all the flights incoming into LAX, Las Vegas, San Diego, and all of the major metropolitan airports in Southern California. That represents hundreds of thousands of passengers every single day. When you talk about security and you talk about the safety of American citizens, there is nothing more dangerous than having air traffic controllers who are not being paid, who are having in many cases to work multiple jobs to be able to feed their families and pay their bills, in addition to a lack of support staff. That is a tremendous risk for us having a collision or for us having some kind of a deadly accident in the most basic sense of the word. So I'm here to say that this is about, we have the human stories. We know how important it is on an individual basis, but this is also about our security and our safety. And we're here as Democrats, we're here to open up the government. We look forward to the conversation as soon as government is open. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Questions? I'm sorry.
Thank you. Could you comment on the invitation that went out from the White House apparently to a group of House Democrats, and would leadership prefer that they not attend this meeting with Trump today?
I think the position has been that we support the notion of continued dialogue. Every individual member will have to make a determination as to whether they believe it will be fruitful dialogue. The question that I think everyone can reasonably ask is he inviting people to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to really try to resolve this problem, or to create a photo op so he can project a false sense of bipartisanship? That is a question that I think every individual member will have to entertain for themselves, but we are certainly not discouraging anyone from attempting to have a meaningful discussion about this issue.
Is there an organized effort by leadership to keep people from defecting over to voting with Republicans or growing more sympathetic to the president on some sort of compromise?
Seems to me, and I'll have the other members comment on this, there's an organized effort on the part of Republican leadership to keep people from defecting. The only bipartisan effort that is underway here in the United States Capitol is the House Democratic effort, where we've consistently seen first 6 Republicans, then 8 Republicans, then 10 Republicans, then 12 Republicans. You'll likely see that number increase, continuing to vote with House Democrats to reopen government. You've also seen the same thing in the Senate in terms of Senate Republicans, Cory Gardner, and the senator from Maine, Susan Collins, as well as others, increasingly express concern that the Republican position is irresponsible. All we're simply saying is, let's reopen government so we can have a mature discussion about border security without holding 800,000 federal workers hostage and the majority of the American people. Does anyone else want to respond?
So you got your dozens. What does it take to get to the 55 or whatever the number is to get to 2/3? What sort of political reality, what sort of pressure gets you to that number where you can override the presidential veto? Because that's what it'll take, right?
Well, I think it was Congresswoman Hayes who mentioned, all we're simply asking for is Republicans to undertake their Article 1 responsibility as a separate and co-equal branch of government and stop acting like wholly owned subsidiaries of the Trump administration. The responsible thing to do is simply work together in a bipartisan way, reopen government, allow for the time to have a discussion about these tough border security issues without damaging these federal workers, the American people, small businesses, farmers, or others. We're going to continue to do our job. We hope the Republicans increasingly will start to demand that the Republican leadership in the Senate do their job as well. Catherine?
If I can just add to that, I'd like to underscore that the Democrats are completely unified in that our objective is to reopen government. That is why we are taking the Republican Senate-approved bills, not the bills that we would draft, as a blueprint for how we get government reopened. And just to emphasize what the chairman just said, Around Homeland Security, we're asking for 30 days, keeping the pressure on those negotiations. But what we're unwilling to do is hold these federal employees, their families, the bottom lines, the loss in GDP that we are experiencing, $2 billion a week in lost wages and other economic factors, hostage to this idea that we use this blunt, terrible instrument of government shutdown to get a pet policy of the president. He had made an agreement with the Republicans in the Senate, and under pressure from conservative commentators, he went back on that. So it is time for Republicans to say, let's get government reopened, let's put the pressure back on negotiations, and have those discussions in a way that is time limited. But we are extremely unified, and the American people are unified with us, that shutting down government for this particular policy is not the way we need to go forward. I don't know if you want to add, Katie?
I just want to add that what we've experienced from this last election cycle is that every single member of Congress on the House and the Senate side is accountable not to the President of the United States or to leadership of their own parties, but to the American people and to the citizens of their districts. And ultimately, to get to a 2/3 majority, that's where that pressure is going to have to come from, is from people who want their representative to do the right thing and to act in their best interests, not to act on the behest of Donald Trump, to stand up and say that we need to reopen government. Right now, that sits with Mitch McConnell.
I think, can I just say, just to follow up on what Katie said, we have a responsibility to the American people. We hear a lot about the numbers and the statistics about 800,000 federal workers. These are all people. These are families. These are faces. When we're talking about their stories, we have to keep in mind that these are people. And when the president talks about this in a very partisan fashion, I'd like to remind him that you are my president too. You know, I'm no longer a candidate. At the moment where I took the oath, I became the representative of the people of the 5th Congressional District. I have a responsibility to represent the people in my district. This president has a responsibility to represent all of the people in this country. We cannot run government based on campaign promises. It's unconscionable to me that at the moment where Democrats were positioned to take control of the House, border security became the number one issue of this administration. That's not how we govern. We have to put pressure from the inside, from the outside, from our communities on the elected officials to do the job that they were sent here to do.
Cheddar?
Thank you, Chairman. Two questions, if you'll permit me. But the first on this issue, despite the fact that polling shows the majority of Americans may be blaming Republicans for the president, there's about 30% or so that say it's because of Democrats. What is your message specifically to those Americans who say it's not the president, it's not the GOP, it's the Democrats that now lead us to the situation where we're on day 25? And then a follow-up, if you'll permit me.
Well, we're going to continue to work on behalf of all Americans, but I think any objective political scientist understands, and I believe Donald Trump himself said that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and some segment of the American people would remain committed to him. The fact is he's probably topped out at his number. Those are people who we want to work with. We want to reopen government for them, but understandably, they are his core supporters, and it doesn't seem to matter what he does, they will continue to support him. But the problem that the president has is that the overwhelming majority of the American people outside of his narrow base agrees with our position, which is reopen government, stop hurting American families, and then allow us to have a mature discussion about border security over the next 30 or so days.
And then a second follow-up, if you don't mind, on a separate issue here. Based on everything that's been going on the last few days that you've read or written, or that you've read or seen, do you personally believe that the president of the United States is a Russian asset, sir?
Well, I'm not going to comment as to what my personal beliefs are right now. I think that the problem has been, with every bit of evidence that continues to emerge, there is legitimate concern that high-level members of the Trump campaign, possibly including the president, did have interactions with Russian spies designed to hijack the 2016 election, sell out our democracy, and artificially put someone into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. At the end of the day, that's a process that's going to have to work out through the Mueller investigation. and our position has been uniformly, with one or two exceptions, we have to let the Mueller investigation conclude. He can then report to the American people, to Congress, to the Department of Justice, and we can decide what the appropriate step is thereafter. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll go to you next. Yeah. Excuse me? I think the next step that we've decided to take will be a resolution of disapproval that is going to be on the floor of the House of Representatives today, put forth by our Democratic whip, James Clyburn.
Mine was a follow-up on that, actually, on the King matter. Bobby Rush said yesterday that he thinks the Clyburn resolution skirts the issue and that it doesn't go far enough. And there have been a number of people coming out of caucus this morning saying they actually want to do a censure. Why not do a censure?
I think we've decided that the most appropriate step at this moment, and no one has more credibility on this issue than Jim Clyburn, with the exception, of course, of the saintly John Lewis, who is supporting this particular resolution of disapproval. Their decision, he comes out of the Deep South. He understands racism. He's experienced it throughout his entire life. He's concluded that the most appropriate way to proceed at this moment is to put forth a resolution that we expect will secure bipartisan support, because white supremacy, white nationalism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, hate, xenophobia, all of these issues aren't Democratic issues or Republican issues. They are American issues that we should address in a bipartisan way, and that's why we decided to proceed in this fashion. I don't know if anyone else wants to respond.
That's a privileged resolution, so anybody, from my understanding, can bring it up. Are you guys working to make sure that somebody doesn't bring up the censure?
We're working to make sure that we pass the resolution of disapproval by James C. Clyburn in a strong bipartisan fashion today. Thank you, everyone.